Hello, I'm Gabriel, and I've spent my whole life building a home, a family. But everything changed the day my son sold my house for $1.9 million and left me with just $10,000. The real betrayal? The court froze every penny, leaving me with nothing. For years, I've been ignored, taken for granted, and now I'm left fighting for what's rightfully mine. Why did he do this? And what's the real story behind this? You won't believe what I discovered. The morning light filtered through the faded curtains of my modest home. The house, once full of life and laughter, now stood quiet, echoing with memories of better days. I stretched my stiff joints as I rolled out of bed. The same routine, day in and day out. At 65, it didn't take much to get me through the day anymore. A cup of coffee, a quick scan of the newspaper, and I'd go about my business in my small corner of the world. There was a certain peace in my routine, a quiet sort of satisfaction. But as I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, a heavy feeling weighed on me. It wasn't the aging body or the quiet house that troubled me. It was the distance between my son, Austin, and me. Austin, my only child, had grown distant over the years. Once we were close, he was my pride and joy. I worked hard, long hours to give him the life I thought he deserved, hoping that one day he'd appreciate it. But now, it seemed like those years of hard work had faded into oblivion. I could feel it, the emotional distance between us. He was busy with his own life, always just out of reach. A quick phone call here and there, but nothing substantial. I sighed, rubbing my temples. It was the weight of time creeping up on me. I looked at my hands, rough from years of work, and realized how quickly the years had slipped by. My body had aged, but it was the loneliness that truly marked the passage of time. I had sacrificed so much for Austin, and yet here I was, alone. He was all I had left, but he was slipping away from me. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, the doorbell rang. A sharp, unexpected sound in the stillness. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I stood up anyway, making my way to the door. There, standing on the other side, was Austin. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice flat. "Got something for you." He held out a check. I looked at it, confused, but took it anyway. The amount, $10,000, was written clearly across the top. "I sold the house," he said nonchalantly. "Got $1.9 million for it." I blinked. Sold the house? My house? The place my wife and I had worked so hard for? The place that had been our home for over 30 years? "What do you mean?" My voice felt thick, my heart racing as the words left my mouth. "You sold our house? Without telling me?" Austin barely blinked, showing no sign of emotion. "Yeah, it's done. You can take the check. It's a good chunk of change. You should be able to find a cheap place to live now." I stood there, stunned, unable to process what he was saying. My sanctuary, the one place I'd poured my life into, had been sold. And for what? A check for a fraction of what it was worth. No consultation, no discussion, just a cold transaction. I wanted to shout. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. My hands shook as I looked down at the check. "You sold it? Without even asking me?" The words barely escaped my lips, but I could see that Austin wasn't fazed. He shrugged. "It was just a house, Dad. It's too big for you anyway. You'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this really happening? The house we had built together, the place where memories had been made, was gone. And I was left with a check, a mere token for everything I had sacrificed. My mind raced. I thought of all the years I'd worked, all the times I'd put myself second to make sure Austin had the best. I remembered my wife, now gone, and the countless struggles we'd faced together to buy that house. It had been our dream, our escape from hardship, and now it felt like it had all been erased. Austin turned to leave, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I stayed frozen for a moment, staring at the check in my hand. It felt like a weight, a constant reminder of everything that had been taken from me. I didn't react right away. I didn't show him how much it hurt. I took a deep breath, shoved the check into my pocket, and forced myself to keep my expression neutral. I couldn't let him see the full extent of my pain. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "You're welcome," Austin said as he walked away, completely oblivious to the devastation he had caused. As the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long time. My house, my home, felt cold now. The walls that once held warmth and memories felt like a prison. I walked into the living room, the place where my wife and I had spent so many nights talking, laughing, and dreaming. Now, it felt like a hollow shell, a place that had once been filled with life but now echoed with emptiness. I thought of the years we had spent building a life together, the sacrifices we had made for Austin, and the love we had poured into this home. All of it seemed so distant now. The house that once symbolized our hard work and dedication now felt like a cruel reminder of how little I mattered to my own son. I wanted to scream, to confront him, but I didn't. I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned, over the years, that sometimes the best thing to do was say nothing at all. But that didn't mean I wasn't hurting. As I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window where I'd spent countless hours, I reflected on the years that had led to this moment. I had spent so much of my life giving, loving, and supporting. And now, it felt like none of it mattered. I thought about my wife, how she would have reacted. Would she have cried? Would she have demanded answers? I wondered if she had known this would happen, if she had seen the signs that I had missed. And yet, here I was, standing alone in a house that was no longer mine, wondering where everything had gone wrong. I sat alone in the living room, the check still clenched tightly in my hand, the weight of it pressing down on me as if it were a stone. My chest tightened with a mix of betrayal and confusion, and my mind raced, replaying every moment of the last few hours. Austin had left without a word of apology, without a hint of remorse, and here I was, trying to process the reality of what had just happened. I kept staring at the check, its value now meaningless to me. $10,000. A fraction of what the house had been worth, and yet that number felt so insignificant when compared to the years of hard work, the sacrifices I had made. I wanted to confront him, shout at him, demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I sat in silence. The anger simmering beneath the surface, part of me wanted to rush to him, to make him see the hurt he had caused. But the other part of me, maybe the wiser part, knew that it wouldn't change a damn thing. I didn't want to be the man who lashed out in anger, only to regret it later. I had been that man once, many years ago, when life had been a constant struggle. Now, I had learned the value of silence. But silence felt like surrender. I couldn't help but wonder, where had I gone wrong? I had spent my whole life working for Austin, making sure he had everything he needed. And now, it felt like everything had been taken from me in an instant. The house, the memories, the family. Austin had sold it all, and in doing so, he had sold me out. I thought back to the years when my wife and I had worked so hard to make that house our home. It hadn't come easily. Every penny we saved, every sacrifice we made, it had been for him. And now, in one cold move, it all felt meaningless. I couldn't just sit there, doing nothing. I needed to act. I needed to take control. But how? What was I supposed to do next? The house was gone, my family was broken, and I was left holding a check for $10,000. Was that all I was worth? As the hours passed, I finally made a decision. I had to confront Austin. There was no other way. I couldn't let this go, not without at least giving him a piece of my mind. I stood up, walked to the door, and dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice casual, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, Dad," he said. "What's up?" I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "We need to talk." There was a brief silence on the other end, before Austin responded. "About what?" "The house," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I want to know why you sold it without even telling me." I could hear him sigh, and I could picture the eye roll that would follow. "It's just business, Dad," he said, his tone dismissive. "You don't need it anymore. It's a big house for one person. I thought you'd be happier with the money." I felt my blood begin to boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let him see how much this hurt. "Happier with the money?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Is that what you think this is about? Money?" "Well, yeah," Austin said, his voice cold. "You've been living there alone for years. It's a hassle for you. You can find a smaller place, something more manageable." His words were like a slap in the face. He had no idea. The house wasn't just a building to me. It was everything. It was the place where I had raised him, where his mother and I had spent our best years. It was a symbol of the life we had built together, and now it was gone. All of it, just like that. "I don't need your money, Austin," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What I needed was your respect, your understanding. But I guess that doesn't matter to you." There was another long pause, and then Austin spoke again, his words feeling hollow. "Look, Dad, I'm just trying to help. You're getting older, and this place is too big for you. You'll be better off in something smaller." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like he didn't even see me as a person anymore, just an old man in the way. His words were a dismissal, a complete disregard for everything I had done for him. And then, as if to rub salt in the wound, he handed me the check. "Here," he said. "It's a generous gesture. You should be grateful for it." I took the check from his hand, my fingers brushing against his. The coldness of the moment hit me hard. This wasn't just about the house. This was about everything I had sacrificed for him, everything I had given up to make sure he had a better life. And now, it felt like it was all for nothing. I could feel the anger building inside me, but I kept it in check. There was no point in arguing with him. He wouldn't understand. He never had. And yet, as much as I wanted to yell at him, to let him know how deeply he had hurt me, I knew it wouldn't do any good. I shoved the check into my pocket, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I'll take it," I said, my voice low. "But don't think for a second that I'm grateful." Austin didn't seem to notice the underlying anger in my words. He just nodded and turned to leave, his back already turned to me before I could say anything else. As I watched him walk away, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. I wanted to scream, to ask him why. Why had he done this? But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, staring at the door, the coldness of the house around me. I had been stripped of everything, my home, my family, and now, it seemed, my dignity. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I would make him see what he had done. I would make him regret this. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way. I woke up to another quiet morning. The same familiar routine that had become my life since retirement. The coffee brewed, the house still, and the weight of the last few days settled like a heavy fog in my chest. I had thought, after Austin's visit, that I could let it go, let the hurt slide off, as I had done with so many other things over the years. But as I sat at the kitchen table, the check still in my hand, something inside me snapped. This was no longer just about losing the house. It wasn't about the money either. It was about respect, dignity, my place in this family. And I realized, with painful clarity, that if I didn't act now, I would lose that too. The house had been a symbol of everything I'd worked for, a place for my family, my son, and now that symbol was shattered. I could feel the anger rising, bubbling beneath the surface of my calm exterior. But this time, I wasn't going to let it consume me. I had learned over the years that rash decisions only made things worse. I would fight this battle, but I would do it on my terms. I had always been a man of action, someone who kept his cool and handled problems head on. I wasn't about to change that now. The phone call came later that morning. I had been thinking about how to approach this situation. And then it hit me, lawyers. If Austin thought he could just take what was mine and walk away, he had another thing coming. I needed to consult a lawyer, get some advice, see what my options were. I picked up the phone and made the call. Mr. Thompson, this is Gabriel, I said when the lawyer answered. I need your help. The lawyer was patient, asked me for the details, and agreed to meet with me the following day. As I hung up the phone, a small sense of relief washed over me. This was the first step. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the right thing to do. As I sat back in my chair, memories flooded my mind. The day I bought that house with my late wife, the dock, struggles we endured to make it our home, and the promise we had made to ourselves to create a life that our son could thrive in. The house had been the symbol of our hard work, a place where memories were made, and I had hoped it would be a place where our family could stay together forever. But things had changed. Austin had changed. I had changed. Over the years, I had worked so hard for him, sacrificed so much, but in the end, it felt like all of that was for nothing. Austin had always been a bit distant, but lately, the distance had grown into something I couldn't ignore. His visits had become fewer, his calls less frequent, and when he did come by, it was always about something, never just a visit, never just to talk. I thought back to the promises Austin had made, the things he had promised to do for me when I got older. I remembered that conversation from years ago when he had said he would take care of me. Now, that promise felt like a cruel joke. I stood up and paced around the house, my fingers running along the old furniture. The house that had once been filled with laughter, warmth, and love now felt hollow. The silence was deafening. The house no longer felt like home. It was just a building, a reminder of what I had lost. I thought about the times when Austin was younger, when we used to laugh together, when he looked up to me. It hadn't always been easy, but we had been a family. The flashbacks came in waves, family dinners, holidays, birthdays. The house had always been the center of those moments, the place where we came together. Now, I wondered where it had all gone wrong. Had I done something wrong? Was I too trusting? Too lenient? I shook my head, dismissing the thoughts. I had done the best I could. I had always done my best for Austin, and this was the thanks I got? The house was gone, and all I had left was a check and the bitter taste of betrayal. The next day, I sat in my lawyer's office, listening to him explain the legal steps I could take to fight the sale of the house. There were ways to challenge the sale, on the grounds of betrayal of trust. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. I took a deep breath, the gravity of the situation starting to settle in. This was going to be a long battle, but I wasn't backing down. I left the lawyer's office with a clear plan in mind. I would gather all the evidence I could, consult with family friends who might have insight into Austin's actions, and prepare for the fight of my life. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about my dignity, my family, and my future. But as the day wore on, the anger started to simmer. Austin's cold indifference had been too much. His justification for selling the house, for taking what was mine without a second thought, it was too much to bear. I thought about confronting him again, telling him everything I felt. But this time, I would do it differently. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I had learned that much over the years. No, this time, I would take action. The road ahead would be difficult, and it would take time. But I was ready. Ready to take back what had been taken from me. Ready to stand up for myself, even if it meant facing the hardest battle of my life. As I sat in my office that evening, I stared at the legal papers I had gathered. This was it. The final step. No more turning back now. The morning after the meeting with Austin, I sat at my desk, the weight of the situation settling in around me like a heavy fog. My hands gripped the papers in front of me, all of them proof of the battle I was about to embark on. The truth, my truth, was at stake now, and I was no longer content to let it slip through my fingers. The anger I had felt in the previous days was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it was tempered by something else: determination. This wasn't just about getting back the house anymore. This was about taking control of my life. For too long, I had let things slide, kept my feelings buried under layers of silence. But silence had only gotten me so far. Now, I was ready to fight. I would do whatever it took to get what was rightfully mine. As I organized the evidence I had gathered, my thoughts wandered back to the past. I remembered the years of hard work, the endless hours I had spent away from home, all for the sake of my family. I had sacrificed so much, always putting their needs ahead of mine. But now, it seemed like all that sacrifice had been in vain. I couldn't allow myself to dwell on that, though. Not anymore. This was about moving forward. The past was done. What mattered now was the future. And I wasn't going to let Austin or anyone else take that away from me. I had a meeting with the lawyer later that day. As I drove to his office, my mind raced with the possibilities. The legal battle wouldn't be easy. I knew that. But it was my only option now, and I wasn't about to back down. The office was sterile, the kind of place where people go to get their problems solved, but never expect them to be solved easily. The lawyer was a man in his 40s, sharp suit, sharp mind, and a demeanor that was calm, calculated, and professional. He took my papers and looked them over, nodding as he read through the details. "We can definitely make a case here," he said, looking up at me. "But you should be prepared for a long process. It's going to get ugly before it gets better." I nodded, already knowing what I was in for. The last few days had shown me just how far I was willing to go. I wasn't afraid of the fight. I just had to be smart about it. "We'll take this step by step," he continued. "We'll need more evidence, but we have a solid starting point. This isn't going to be quick, but we can win it." I left the lawyer's office with a renewed sense of purpose. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. I wasn't a passive observer anymore. I was in control, and for the first time in days, I felt like I was on the right path. Later that night, I sat at home, the house eerily quiet. I couldn't help but think about Austin's words, the way he dismissed me, as if I were just a nuisance in his life, something to be gotten rid of. He hadn't even apologized for the house. He hadn't shown a hint of regret. But that was Austin, always focused on the next step, the next business deal, the next opportunity to make a quick buck. He had never understood the value of family the way I did, and now it was too late for him to learn. The thought stung, but I wasn't going to let it cripple me. Instead, I focused on the next steps. The lawyer had told me it would take time. He'd also warned me that the battle ahead would take its toll. But I was prepared for that. This was more than just a legal fight. It was a fight for my dignity. And it was a fight I was willing to win. As the days passed, I prepared for the first court hearing. The reality of what I was about to face began to sink in. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I had to go through with it. This wasn't just about winning back the house. It was about standing up for myself, standing up for the man I had become after all these years. The day of the hearing, I woke up early, dressed in the suit I hadn't worn in years, and made my way to the courthouse. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the folder full of documents that I had spent so much time organizing. It was a strange feeling, dread mixed with anticipation. The courtroom was cold, too cold for my liking. I sat in the back, waiting for my name to be called, watching as Austin's lawyer swaggered in, clearly confident. The man was everything I despised, slick, polished, and entirely without a shred of empathy. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me, but I kept my composure. This wasn't the time for emotion. Not yet. When the judge called the case, I stood up and walked forward. The lawyer shot me a glance, a smug look on his face. He knew this was just the beginning, but I could see in his eyes that he underestimated me. That was his mistake. The proceedings were tense. Austin's lawyer focused on technicalities, trying to poke holes in my case, dismissing my feelings as irrelevant. He was doing his job, but it felt like a slap in the face. As the back and forth continued, I held my ground, my confidence growing. The judge listened carefully, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a voice. Then, something unexpected happened. In the middle of the hearing, a new piece of evidence surfaced, completely catching Austin's lawyer off guard. It was a document that showed Austin might have knowingly manipulated the situation for his own gain. The room went silent for a moment, and I felt the air shift. This was the break I had been waiting for. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication as the lawyer stumbled over his words, trying to recover from the unexpected revelation. The tables had turned, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of the situation. But even as the lawyer stammered, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still battles to fight, still obstacles to overcome. But this moment, this small victory, felt like the first real win in a long time. I wasn't done yet, and I wasn't about to let Austin or anyone else take what was rightfully mine. I left the courthouse with a quiet sense of satisfaction, but the battle was far from over. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was only going to get harder. But I was ready. I was ready to take whatever came next. I would not back down. It's strange how a single moment can change everything. One simple discovery, and everything that once seemed clear begins to unravel. That's how I felt as I stared at the evidence in front of me. The key piece that could finally tip the scales in my favor. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The house, the money, the betrayal, it was all starting to make sense. Austin had known exactly what he was doing, and now the truth was laid bare. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for my dignity. I had been taken for granted, manipulated, and left to rot in silence. But not anymore. I could feel the weight of the moment, my chest tight, with a mix of fear and excitement. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a fight for my place in the world, a fight for respect. I wasn't going to let them push me aside any longer. Not Austin, not anyone. With the evidence secured, I began to prepare. I organized my thoughts, reviewed my options, and made a plan. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking charge. I spent the next few days in a blur of activity. Meetings with lawyers, phone calls with family friends, late nights digging through old documents. Every step was a calculated move. My focus had never been sharper. The years of passivity, of letting things slide, were over. I was going to take back what was mine. But even as I prepared, there was a nagging fear in the back of my mind. What if I lost? What if the system didn't work? What if my family turned against me? I couldn't afford to think about that. If I did, I'd lose my resolve. The truth was on my side. That was all that mattered. I couldn't avoid the inevitable forever, though. The phone call came that day. It was Sarah. She wanted to talk. When I met her, the air between us was thick with unspoken words. She could see the determination in my eyes, but she wasn't ready to take sides. She never had been. She was always caught between me and Austin, and now she was caught in the middle again. "Dad, I don't know what to say," she began, her voice heavy. "I understand that you're upset, but this isn't just about the house. It's about family. This fight, it's tearing everything apart." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. The family was falling apart, but what was I supposed to do? How could I just let Austin get away with it? "I'm not fighting for the house, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm fighting for what's right, for the truth, for my dignity." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something, anything, that would make this all make sense. But there was no easy answer. "You're my father," she said, her voice breaking. "But Austin, he's your son. You've always been there for him. And now it feels like we're all being torn apart." I didn't have a response. The words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to lose my family, but I couldn't just roll over either. The fight was bigger than that. I left the conversation feeling more conflicted than ever. The weight of what I was doing pressed down on me. On one hand, I was fighting for justice. On the other, I was losing the family I had worked so hard to build. The emotional toll was growing heavier by the day. The trial was getting closer, and I could feel the pressure mounting. I had made my decision, though. There was no turning back now. I wasn't going to be silenced. The first day of the trial arrived, and I stood in the courthouse, my heart pounding in my chest. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. Austin's lawyer was already there, sharp and polished, his smirk barely hidden behind his well-tailored suit. They tried to paint me as a relic of the past, an old man who couldn't understand the complexities of the modern world. I refused to let that get to me. I stood tall, presenting my evidence calmly and clearly. I wasn't going to let them define me. The judge listened, and for the first time, I felt like I had a voice again. The lawyer's tactics were aggressive, but I held my ground. There was something about staying calm in the chaos that gave me strength. I could feel the tension in the room, but I was steady, unwavering. Then, the unexpected happened. A surprise witness was called to the stand, one of Austin's business partners. The man was nervous, shifting uncomfortably in his seat as he spoke, but his words sent shockwaves through the room. The witness revealed that Austin had been involved in fraudulent dealings surrounding the sale of the house. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Austin hadn't just betrayed me. He had knowingly manipulated the entire situation for his own benefit. The room fell silent. I could feel the tide turning in my favor. For the first time, I felt like the truth was finally being heard. The lawyer stumbled over his words, trying to recover from the revelation, but it was too late. The truth was out there, and there was no hiding from it now. I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high. It wasn't over, but this was a turning point. The fight wasn't just for the house anymore. It was for everything I had lost: my dignity, my family, my peace of mind. But as the door closed behind me, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to back down now. Later that day, my phone rang again. It was Sarah. She was conflicted, still unsure where she stood, but her voice had softened. Just a little. "You were right, Dad," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm sorry I couldn't see it before. I understand now. I'm here for you." Those words, simple as they were, meant more to me than anything. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the path to reclaiming what I had lost. The morning of the trial arrived with an odd stillness. I had spent days preparing for this, the final confrontation. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. The house, the betrayal, the fear of losing my dignity. But I was ready. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself for a long moment. My reflection wasn't just that of a man who had been through a fight, but of one who had decided to keep standing, no matter what. Today wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about something much more important: my self-respect, the truth, and everything I had fought for over the years. The path ahead felt uncertain, but I wasn't walking it with hesitation. I'd come too far to turn back. The courtroom would be my battlefield now, and all my preparation had led to this moment. I reviewed my notes, checked the evidence once more, and took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. There was no room for mistakes today. I wasn't just fighting against Austin anymore. I was fighting for everything that had been stripped from me. As I sat in the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel the tension in the air. The walls were too quiet, too sterile, the atmosphere thick with the impending clash. Austin walked in with his usual arrogance. He had his lawyers flanking him, their smug faces hardly concealing their belief that this would be an easy win for them. The first few moments felt like an eternity. Austin's lawyer took the floor, dismissing me with a tone that almost made my blood boil. They painted me as a man who had been duped by his own kindness, a fool who couldn't understand modern business practices. It stung, but I kept my composure. I wasn't about to let them push me into a corner. The opposing side didn't hold back. Every word they spoke was meant to undermine me. But I stood my ground, presenting the evidence with the calm precision I'd honed over these past weeks. Every detail mattered. Every piece of proof I laid out slowly turned the tide in my favor. I wasn't giving them an inch, and though I was under pressure, I could feel my focus sharpen. The lawyers' arguments were weak at best. They tried to discredit me, casting doubt on my character and my ability to fight this. But as they spoke, I could feel the courtroom shift. The more they attacked, the stronger my resolve became. The lies didn't scare me. In fact, they fueled my drive. Then came the twist. Out of nowhere, Austin's lawyer's smug expression faltered. A new document was presented, one I hadn't expected. A letter from a trusted business partner of Austin's, revealing the depth of his fraudulent actions. It was a bombshell. The letter exposed the manipulation of the house sale, the hidden motives behind Austin's actions. The room went silent for a moment, and I could see Austin's face drain of color. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The shock on his face was priceless. For once, the control had shifted to me, and I wasn't about to let it go. With that revelation, the momentum in the courtroom completely flipped. The judge's eyes shifted from skepticism to genuine concern. The truth was finally beginning to emerge, and I could feel my confidence surge. Austin's lies were no longer going to be swept under the rug. As the trial went on, the pressure began to feel more manageable. I was still on edge, but the fear was gone. I could see the cracks in Austin's defense, and I could hear his confidence begin to falter. He had underestimated me, thinking I would just roll over. But today was different. And then, just when I thought things might settle into a predictable pattern, Sarah showed up. I wasn't expecting it. She walked in during a break, looking uncertain but determined. It caught me off guard, and for a moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to do. But then she approached me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said quietly, her voice full of regret. "I didn't see it until now. I've been avoiding the truth, hiding from it. You're right. This isn't just about the house." Her words, simple as they were, felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I could feel the years of tension, of silence between us, begin to crack. Sarah wasn't taking sides, just for the sake of it. She was stepping into the truth, no matter how painful it was. She stood by me, and that was all I needed. The world seemed to change in that moment. There was hope, not just for the case, but for my family, for the possibility of something healing between us. When the trial resumed, I had a renewed strength. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Sarah was there. She had come to understand, even if it took too long. The final stretch of the trial was the hardest. Austin, desperate and running out of options, tried one last trick. He claimed that I had coerced witnesses, twisted facts, and manipulated the case to my advantage. But it was too late. The truth was out. The evidence had already spoken for itself. He tried to flee the courtroom. The scene unfolded in front of everyone. Austin, in a last-ditch effort to escape, tried to rush for the door, but security was already there, waiting. They moved in quickly, and soon, Austin was being escorted out, humiliated. I watched it all happen, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and relief. It was over. The courtroom was dead silent as Austin was escorted out. There was no triumphant cheer, no loud victory cry, just the quiet, undeniable reality that the truth had won. I had won. The emotional toll of the entire trial hit me hard once we left the courtroom. I had my house back, but at what cost? The years of family strife, the damage to relationships, it all hung heavy in the air. I went back home, but it wasn't the same place. It wasn't the warm family home I once knew. It was a place of loss and victory intertwined. In the days that followed, I reached out to Sarah again. We sat down, talked for hours, not about the trial, not about the house, but about us, about the pain we had both carried for so long. She wasn't just my daughter anymore, she was someone I could finally talk to again. We had a long road ahead, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I'd fought for the truth, and maybe, just maybe, that battle had won me something more valuable than a house, the chance to rebuild my family. I woke up that morning, the weight of everything pressing down on me like an old heavy coat I'd been wearing for years. Today was the day I had to face it, all the years of pain, the silence and the betrayal. The courtroom victory was behind me, But what had I really gained? My house? Yes. But at what cost? I stood by the window for a long moment, letting the early morning light spill over me, reflecting on what had led me here. For so many years, I had carried the burden alone, sacrificing for a family that didn't seem to see me, much less appreciate what I'd done. There were moments when I wondered if it had all been worth it, if the choices I made had led me down the right path, or had I simply been a fool, letting my heart guide me where reason should have ruled. It was clear now that the emotional cost of the years I spent trying to keep everyone together, my son, my daughter, the house, the memories, was far too much. But there was no going back. The fight I had fought had taken more than I could ever have imagined. My dignity, my family, my future, everything was laid bare. And now, as I prepared for what was next, there was only one thing left: to face the past. There was regret, yes, but there was also a sense of resolve, a quiet determination. I had stood up in that courtroom, facing Austin with everything I had. Now, I had to face my daughter, and that would be harder than any trial. When I called Sarah, I didn't know what to expect. I had no illusions that we'd pick up where we'd left off. Too much had been said, and too much had been left unsaid. But I knew it was time for us to talk. When she walked into the room, it felt like the years between us had suddenly grown even wider. The silence between us was palpable, and neither of us knew exactly how to break it. But eventually, Sarah spoke. "I should have said something a long time ago," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have stood by you when all of this started, but I didn't. I let things slide. I let Austin manipulate everything." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. It wasn't easy to hear, but I needed to hear it. I needed to understand why she had stayed silent, why she hadn't seen the pain I was going through, why she hadn't believed me when I told her that Austin was taking everything from us. And then, as we spoke, Sarah did something unexpected. She pulled out an old letter. It was from her mother, my late wife. A letter that had been tucked away, hidden until now. The words in it were full of regrets, full of pain. She had wished she could have done more, been there more for both of us. In a way, she had been apologizing for things that couldn't be fixed anymore. I held the letter in my hands for a long time, feeling the weight of everything it represented. It was a symbol of all the brokenness, but also of a chance for healing. For the first time, I felt like I could see things clearly, not just from my perspective, but from Sarah's as well. This letter, though it couldn't change the past, had opened up something between us. We had both been holding on to our own pain, our own regrets. But now, there was room for forgiveness. The conversation between Sarah and me wasn't perfect. There were moments of anger, of tears, of silence. But as I looked at her, really looked at her, I saw the daughter I had loved, the daughter who had been lost in the same storm I'd been battling. It wasn't my enemy. She was my family. We weren't there yet. Reconciliation wasn't going to happen overnight. But in that moment, I knew we were on our way. After the conversation with Sarah, I felt a glimmer of hope. But I knew I still had one more person to face Austin. The time had come to confront him, once and for all. I had no illusions about how this was going to go, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Not like I had been before. Austin's arrogance was still as sharp as ever when I met him. He walked in with that same swagger, acting as if he'd won. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "You don't get to play the victim here," I told him, my voice steady but firm. "I'm done with your games, Austin. You've done enough damage to this family, and I'm not letting you get away with it." His face twisted with frustration. "You don't understand, Dad," he said, his voice rising. "You never did. You don't get how hard things are, how much pressure I've been under. You think I did this just to hurt you? I didn't. I was trying to survive." I stood there, listening to him, and for the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. Austin wasn't just a selfish son. He was a man broken by his own demons. The fear, the insecurity, the The pressure from his wife and financial advisors, they had all weighed on him. He had made choices that hurt everyone, including himself. But in his own twisted way, he had been trying to protect what he thought was his. It didn't excuse what he did. It didn't make it right. But for a brief moment, I saw my son, not as the enemy, but as a man who had lost his way. "You were manipulated, Austin," I said softly. "But that doesn't give you the right to betray me. It doesn't give you the right to treat your family like tools for your own gain." And in that moment, he broke. He admitted it. He told me how others had influenced him, how he had been pushed into the decisions he made. But even as he confessed, I could feel the walls between us growing thicker. The damage had been done. "Dad, I'm sorry," Austin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I looked at him, torn. Part of me wanted to forgive him. Part of me wanted to lash out. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't change the past. And I couldn't force him to be the son I wanted. What was broken could never be fully fixed. But perhaps we could start anew. As Austin left, I sat there, heavy-hearted, wondering what the future would hold. Forgiveness was a hard road to walk, but it was the only road that offered hope. The weight of everything that had happened, the trial, the confrontation with Austin, the cracks that had been forming in my family still hung heavily on me as I sat in the quiet of my house that afternoon. The victory was mine, sure. The house was safe, and the legal battle was won. But that didn't change the fact that everything I'd fought for had come at a steep emotional cost. I replayed the confrontation with Austin over and over in my head, and every time, it felt like a fresh wound. His confession, his vulnerability, it threw me off guard. I'd expected anger, deflection, maybe even more manipulation. But what I got was raw, uncomfortable truth. He had been manipulated, but that didn't make his actions right. It was hard to stomach the idea that my own son, the one I'd worked so hard to raise, had been so easily swayed by those around him. But in the end, wasn't I also complicit in letting things spiral this far? I had stayed silent for so long, tried to hold the family together on my own. Had it all been for nothing? My thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. It was Sarah. I'd called her earlier, but she hadn't been able to talk. I had been expecting her call, but I didn't know what to say when she picked up. "Hey, Dad," her voice came through, a little shaky, but stronger than before. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I want you to know I'm here. For you. For all of it." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Sarah's words, the sincerity in them, felt like a balm to the wound Austin had left behind. But this wasn't just about me. I needed her advice, her perspective, something to hold on to as I tried to figure out what came next. We talked for a while, but the conversation took a turn when Sarah spoke up with a surprising piece of advice. "Dad, you can't keep letting the past dictate how you move forward. You've been carrying this burden for so long. It's time to take control of your future. You don't have to wait for Austin or anyone else to change. You can make the decision yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been passive, waiting for others to step up, for someone to take responsibility. But Sarah was right. It was time to take control of my life again. Not just for me, but for her too, and for the family I had left. As we continued talking, I realized something. This wasn't just about what had happened, or what I could do to fix it. It was about what kind of man I wanted to be, moving forward. What kind of father? What kind of legacy? "I want to be someone who stands for what's right," I said, the weight of those words sinking in as I spoke them. "I've spent too many years putting others first. It's time to think about myself, to rebuild, to heal." Sarah's voice softened. "I believe in you, Dad. I really do." When the call ended, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had to start living for myself, not for the expectations or sacrifices of the past. I had been passive for too long. It was time to take action. And so, I began to think more seriously about my next steps. I reached out to legal advisors to discuss my options with the frozen assets and how I could ensure justice for everything I'd been through. It wasn't just about revenge or punishment, it was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine and holding Austin accountable for the mess he had created. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about my own sense of justice, about standing up for myself, about moving forward, even if it meant facing consequences I hadn't expected. As I started gathering my thoughts and strategizing, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It wasn't just resentment. There was determination, a quiet, unyielding resolve that had been growing in me for weeks. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a man who had the power to change his circumstances. And then, just when I thought I was moving forward, something unexpected happened. A few days after I reached out to my legal team, I received a call that would change everything. One of the family members, a cousin who had been involved in the family gatherings over the years, had unearthed something. A recording from one of the many family events years ago at a holiday dinner. In it, Austin's wife was caught in an unguarded moment, admitting, unknowingly, that she had been manipulating Austin to make decisions that would financially benefit her. The evidence hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just Austin who had been in the wrong. His wife had been the mastermind behind much of the scheme, and now it was all laid bare. I knew it was time to take legal action not just against Austin, but against the forces that had been behind him, pulling the strings all along. When the news broke, I knew the family would be up in arms. Austin's wife immediately tried to downplay the situation, offering weak excuses, claiming she was only trying to help Austin make the best choices. But I wasn't buying it anymore. This wasn't about family loyalty or protecting each other, it was about justice. And I wasn't going to let anyone sweep this under the rug. I stood my ground. The family, including Sarah, was divided. Some saw it as my rightful move to protect myself and my assets. Others were angry at how the whole situation had played out, and some couldn't even look me in the eye. But I knew this was necessary. The truth had to come out. I couldn't let the past define my future. And through it all, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of release. I had stood up for myself, for what was right. The emotional toll had been immense, but I was beginning to understand something important. No matter what happened next, I could move forward with my head held high. I looked down at the letter from my wife, the one I had never opened until now. It was a reminder of everything I had promised her, everything I had failed to accomplish. But I realized that in order to truly heal, I had to let go of the past, the guilt, the anger, and the hurt. It was time to move forward, time to live for myself, and for the future I could still shape. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow on the room as I sat at the kitchen table. The house felt different now. The weight of the past had lifted, at least for the moment, but the air still felt thick with the memories of what had been. I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired. The years of silence, the betrayal, the legal battles, and the fractured relationships. It had been a long and painful journey, but I had reached a place where I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. I was ready to move on, not just from the legal mess with Austin, but from everything that had tied me to the past. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but the constant turmoil, the conflict, the resentment, I had to let it go. I had to make peace with it, even if it meant facing the consequences. I stood up, walking slowly through the house, touching the surfaces that had witnessed my life decisions. Moments of joy, moments of regret. I could feel the ghosts of my past in every corner, but they didn't own me anymore. My past was just that past. And now, it was time to decide what my future would look like. I made the decision then. It was time to end the conflict with Austin. Not necessarily to forgive him, but to close the door on the bitterness and start moving forward. I didn't need to forgive to find peace. I just needed to stop letting it define me. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number. making the call that would set everything in motion. It was time to unfreeze my assets, to get what I was owed, but it was more than just that. I was reclaiming my dignity. I was reclaiming my life. But there was one more thing. I couldn't carry the weight of all these emotions with me any longer. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, it was taking a toll on me. It was time to seek help. To speak to someone who could help me process it all. Therapy. It wasn't easy to admit, but it was the right step. As the day wore on, I felt a strange peace beginning to settle within me. It wasn't complete, but it was a start. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but at least I was taking control. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The phone rang again, this time with a call I wasn't expecting. It was from an extended family member, someone I hadn't heard from in ages. They had been following the developments quietly from the sidelines, and now they had something important to share. "I've got something you need to hear, Gabriel," the voice on the other end said. Something that could change the course of everything. The conversation that followed was more than I could have hoped for. My family member had found evidence, something that could accelerate my case. A recording from a family gathering years ago. Austin's wife, in an unguarded moment, had admitted to manipulating Austin, pushing him toward decisions that benefited her financially. It was the missing piece I needed. It wasn't just Austin I had to face. It was the entire web of manipulation within my own family. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I sat in stunned silence as the call ended. The weight of the moment settled in. With this new evidence, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about standing up for myself and for the future I wanted. It was about accountability. With that revelation, the plan started to take shape. I reached out to my lawyer again, prepared to move forward with renewed vigor. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for justice, for closure, and for my peace of mind. That night, I found myself sitting across from Austin. He had reluctantly agreed to meet. There was no anger in his eyes this time, just a guarded reluctance. "I don't know if we can fix this," I said, the words heavy in the silence between us. "But I need you to understand. I've carried the weight of this family's dysfunction for too long. I'm not going to be your punching bag anymore. You need to own up to what you've done. No more hiding behind excuses." Austin shifted in his seat, the walls he had built over the years crumbling just a little. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. "You don't know what it's like," he began, his voice softer than I expected. "I didn't have a choice. Everything I did, it was because they pushed me into it. Your own actions, your silence." "Don't blame me for your mistakes, Austin," I interrupted, feeling the anger rising again. "You chose your path. No one made you do it." He sat there in silence for a moment, and then, almost in a whisper, he admitted something I hadn't expected. "I was manipulated, Dad. By my wife. By the advisors. I didn't know how to get out of it. I thought it was the only way." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known Austin was hurting, but I never realized how deep that pain ran. His confession didn't erase the betrayal, but it opened a door. Maybe there was hope for him yet. Maybe, just maybe, this conversation was the beginning of something new. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Austin said quietly, "but I need you to know I was wrong. I've been wrong for a long time." I looked at him for a long time, the weight of everything we had said hanging between us. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Austin. Not yet. But I can't keep carrying this with me. I've made my peace, and I'm moving forward. The rest of this is up to you." The silence between us was different this time, less tense, more reflective. As Austin stood to leave, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. There was nothing more to say. I had spoken my truth, and now I had to let him deal with his. Sitting alone in the quiet house that night, I reflected on everything. The battles fought, the years lost, the family I'd tried so hard to hold together. As I looked out the window, the sun beginning to set, I realized that I couldn't change the past, but I had the power to shape my future. I reached for my journal and began to write. My journey had been long and difficult, but it had led me here, ready to move forward, ready to leave the past behind. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of closure. The weight had been lifted, and while I didn't know what the future held, I was ready for it.